Bibles to Esther chapter 4. Thank you, Brother Mel, for reading us the passage. Wow! Woo! The fourth Sunday of August. So we are now in chapter 4 of Esther. If you were joining us for the first time, we are studying the book of Esther beginning of August. So we studied chapter 1 in the first Sunday, and then Sunday 2, number 2 Sunday is chapter 2. Third Sunday, which was last, was chapter 3, and now the fourth Sunday is chapter 4. So we are basically doing a series, and I still have to think if I have to continue, because it's pretty much the study goes. So chapter 4, just a quick review what happened in chapter 3. So there was this proclamation by Haman, the second, the viceroy of the emperor of Persia, the most powerful king back then, and he said that every Jew, man, woman, child, will be killed. I repeat, will be killed. Annihilation of the entire race. And all of their possessions, all of their wealth will be taken, and it will be given to the empire. And so the decree came out with the ring sign of the king, meaning it is official, and it went out to the entire empire. Now, the decree will happen on the 12th month, meaning if it went out in January, the decree will happen on December. So on the 12th month, all of the Jews, men, women, and child, will be annihilated, will be killed, and all of their possessions taken away. Now, that is the background of chapter 3, and now we go to chapter 4. Now, beginning of chapter 4, there are basically, I will probably say, characters that we would like to remember as we study the chapter. I repeat, we cannot understand the story if we don't know the main characters here. So they're basically, I'll probably say two, because the third one is pretty much like a subcategory. The main character in the story is Mordecai, and then Queen Esther. Now Mordecai is the uncle of Esther. Mordecai is the one who raised up Esther. Now, Esther was a poor, orphan, beautiful lady who eventually became the queen of Persia. That was in chapter 2. So I want you to follow me as we go with the story. But chapter 4 pretty much deals with two persons, Mordecai, Queen Esther, and it talks about the Jewish people. Now, verse 1, it says here, when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, meaning the proclamation to annihilate all of the Jews on the 12th month, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter. So when Mordecai heard about the decree, all of the Jews will be killed, men, women, and child, and all of their possessions taken, Mordecai was so depressed. He was so down. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth. He was wailing loudly and bitterly. Now, but he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. Okay, so what was Mordecai's reaction? So he was crying, and he was so down. Mordecai mourned the decree. Surely no one mourned and grieved over the decree more than Mordecai, for it was his decision. Remember the story? It was Mordecai who refused not to bow before Haman, and that was the beginning of Haman's revenge against Mordecai and his people, the Jews. So it was Mordecai, it was his decision not to bow to Haman that had brought this situation, and no doubt he felt personal responsibility. So it was horrible for the Jewish, but it was really double horrible for Mordecai because it was because of him that the decree was made against him, and not only him but his entire people. So he felt so responsible. He felt it's because of me. All of this is happening because of me. And so that was Mordecai. He was crying, he was wailing. And then he went as far as the king's gate. You might be asking, why would Mordecai, of all places, go into the king's gate? Why? Because inside the king's palace is a woman called Esther. And Esther was his cousin. Okay. And so what the story goes, when Esther and Eunuch's female attendant came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes to him, put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai. So when Esther found out, and then the attendants came into Esther, Queen Esther, there was this man who is crying and wailing bitterly at the gate. I think it's your uncle. And then Esther was so surprised. Why all of a sudden her uncle is beginning to wail and cry, all of this thing. And so he sent, without knowing anything, he sent out with new clothes, with everything, because she thought that was the problem. She thought her uncle Mordecai was crying and all of these reactions because he needs something of a physical in nature. And so as a queen, with all of the richness of Persia, so please give these beautiful clothes to him. And eventually Mordecai refused to take the gifts, refused to take the clothes. But we have to remember though Esther's reaction. It's interesting to know that Esther's reaction, she had done such a good job. Remember who is Esther? Esther was also a Jew. Remember that. She had done such a good job concealing her identity that no one even thought to inform her of this threat against the Jewish people. Esther was so isolated. She pretended she was not a Jew, and she made it perfectly clear to the entire palace that she was not a Jew. And so when the decree came out, the annihilation of the Jewish people, Esther was not informed because they really thought it will not affect her. That's how good she is. The problem is, that's deception, pretension. She was living in isolation. Well, we were driving. I just overheard Pastor Greg Laurie's message last night in Harvest Festival, last night, and he said that 63% of Americans are pretty much attached to their cell phones. 63%. Wow, that's a lot. Meaning if this is 63% of us here, 6 out of 10 of us here are pretty much attached to their cell phone. We cannot move, breathe, think without our cell phone. 4 times 5. I don't have 4 times 5. I don't know, 4 times 20. We cannot even think basic things. Oh, where do you live? Oh, I'll just check. I'll just go with Google Maps, and don't worry. Just text me your address, and I will Google it, and then Google Map will give me the directions. We are so indebted right now to our cell phones. everything, everything. You had dinner last night. 500,000 people knows exactly what you had for dinner last night because you post something on Instagram or Facebook. We're so consumed. Now, the problem with that is we are so social media oriented, but we always felt that we are always alone. It's interesting because we know a lot of people in Instagram, in Facebook, but there are times that we just felt alone. And that's the reality of life. It will give you the notion, it will give you the perception that you are not alone, that you are so busy watching, viewing, looking at people's lives, that it really just allows you to forget that you are lonely. Isolation, church, isolation. Esther's reaction is a portrayal of her isolation. She portrayed very well that she is not a Jew, even though the entire race will be annihilated, and she was not even affected. So, so Esther said, why? My uncle doesn't want him to wear these beautiful clothes. I mean, just imagine if your cousin is the queen of Persia, the most powerful, the richest guy in the world, and then probably Esther gave all of the branded clothes to her uncle. Chanel, all of this, Chanel, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, and all these things. I mean, she doesn't buy clothes in Walmart. She probably buys clothes in Rodeo Drive, if that is the present Esther right now. And so when she gave her uncle all of these clothes, he was really branded. But Mordecai says, no! And that really triggers Esther something to ask, why? What's wrong? And so she asks one of the eunuch, this is the eunuch of the king, meaning the advisor of the king, and asks, could you learn what's happening with my uncle? And so the eunuch talked to Mordecai. Mordecai said that in the next 12 months, all of the Jews will be annihilated. And I want Esther to speak to the king and beg for mercy and ask for help. And so the news came back to Esther. What? My people will be annihilated? Men, women, child, everyone? And all of their possessions will be taken away from them and given to the empire? And then it's still not sinking in. And then Mordecai said, ask Esther to approach the king and beg. And that's sank in. Now there's the dilemma. The dilemma is this. Esther knew this. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days had passed since I was called to go to the king. So there was this dilemma. The uncle wants Esther to talk to the king, not only to the king, but to her husband, and says, Could you please help my people? The problem is there is a law that not unless the king called you, the moment you step into the inner court, you will be killed. Your head will be cut. That's the law. And so there was a dilemma, and so Esther was there. Maybe, Uncle, there's another way. Baka naman pwede ninyong i-text na lang, or email, or anything like that. But I don't have to be there because the law, if I go there, I will be killed. Esther is not refusing to go to the king, but is counting the cost. She does remind Mordecai of the likely consequence. Uncle, you know what would happen? And imply that she is asking him to consider other options. And then we came to verse 14. If there's one verse in the entire book of Esther that is the most popular, the most read about, the most quoted, it goes to verse 14. And Mordecai reminded Esther and said, Esther, for if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. Wow. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Mordecai was reminding Esther, Esther, remember where we came from. Remember where you came from. You were an orphaned, poor little girl. And I was also a poor Jewish migrant in this land. And I adopted you. And for one reason or another, of all the hundreds and thousands of beautiful women in the entire empire, King Xerxes selected you as his queen. That is something. Maybe you were the queen because of a time like this. So it was Mordecai who reminded Esther, because if you're we have to admit, if you're used to a lifestyle that is so convenient, and all of a sudden your life will be in peril. I mean, you'll be taking risk, and then you feel so uncomfortable about it. I mean, all of the things you have in life are already available to you, and then all of a sudden someone reminded you, hey, remember where you came from? Remember how God brought you. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Mordecai was really telling. It was a way of asking Esther, do you think you have the position of the queen within the kingdom by chance? Esther, I want to reason out with you. Do you think you are the queen by chance? Do you think it is just a coincidence that you were selected among thousands and thousands of beautiful women in the entire empire? Is it a coincidence? Esther, you're in a position because God placed you there. God placed you there. When I was studying the verse, it just reminds us, church, we are here, we are exactly where God wants us to be. It is not an accident, coincidence, or by chance that you are in this service right now. God has a purpose of why God brought you to this place at this very moment. That is to remind you that in your life, nothing is an accident, and nothing is a coincidence, nothing is by chance. God placed you exactly where He wants you to be. Now, Esther, remember, now Esther, after the reminder from Mordecai, she said, and Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. There was a shift. Remember the first reaction of Esther, remember the first response, hey, uncle, maybe there's another way for us to save the Jewish people. Maybe there's another way. Just don't let me go there. Because the Lord said, I will be killed. Then when Mordecai reminded her, Esther, remember this, you were there. God placed you for such a time as this. Oh, I love Mordecai. But there was a change of attitude. And then verse 15, then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa. Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. Wow. If I perished, I perished. Ano sa Tagalog yan? Patay kung patay. Kanina, takot na takot ka ba? Takot na takot ka ba malay? Kaya what's the change? I mean, what happened? There was a total change on Esther. Was Mordecai reminding her, Esther, God made you a queen for such a time as this. And that in itself is the message, church. That sometimes we have to remind one another, brothers and sisters, we are here in this journey called faith together. We have to walk hand in hand. It was not a coincidence that you were all the way from Bacolod, and all of a sudden now you are in this church. That you were from Pampanga. All of a sudden you are now in this church. That you were all the way from Davao or Zamboanga. I've never even been there. But for one reason or another, God brought you into this church. Coincidence? No. Accident? No. By chance? No. It is by God's perfect will that we are here together. So church, you have, and that's something that we have to remind one another. That you are here because God has a perfect plan for you, for us. And you might be telling me, Pastor, I'm already in the church for the past 10 years. Maybe God's purpose is done. And you know what? What's the answer to that? If God's purpose for you is done, then you will be in heaven by now. Okay? If God's perfect plan in your life is done here on earth, then you will be in heaven by now. But you're not. It simply means that you have still a role to play. And so, Esther's reaction, if I perish, I perished. Her faith in God is strengthened through prayer and fasting, trusting in God for all things. Wow. Church, if I perish, I perish. So, someone just have to remind us, brother, we've been missing you. Or sister, we've been missing you. It just lifts us if someone misses us. Church, we just have to remind one another. We need one another in the church. So let's put this into an application right now. Why do you work where you work? Have you asked the question? Why do you work where you work? No choice. That's the first. Pastor, that's the only one who accepted me. Pastor, that's the only. I applied 1,000 applications. There's only one who came back, and that's the one I am right now. Why do you work where you work? I repeat, it's not a coincidence. Not an accident. It's not by chance that you are working where you are working right now. Why do you live where you lived? Huh? Of all places. You could be in Las Vegas, or you could be in New York, or you could be in Montana right now. You could be in Utah. Why Winnetka? Why Winnetka? Why do you live where you live? Why do you go to school where you go to school? There are probably a dozen schools in the valley, but why do you go to a school where you go right now? And why do you go to church? There's 100 churches in the valley. Why go to Field Church? You do what you do because God has assigned you for such a time as this. You are working in that company not by chance, not by coincidence, not by accident. Church. And you are living in that house also, not by chance, coincidence, by accident. I personally believe that that is part of God's providential. Last week I said, if you remember your life as far as 4 years ago, what changed in the last 4 years? Aside from the physical, events in what changed? What changed? Oh, Pastor, I was still living out of state 4 years ago, but now I'm here in the valley. Or I was unemployed, but now I'm working. Or I was still in the Philippines back 4 years ago, but now I'm here. In all places here in the valley. I was asking that question because God implied in me that all of these things that are happening in your life, God is telling you something. God is pointing you to something. We are faced with a continuous sequence of defining moments through our lives as we face decisions that demand we choose either to identify ourselves with Christ, in obedience to His Word, or live as the Word lived. Every day of our lives we have a decision to make. Either we identify with Christ or we identify with the world. Either you say no to the world, yes to God, or yes to the world and no to God. We are making decisions every day of our lives. And sometimes we just need to be reminded, just like Esther. Need to be reminded why we are here in the first place. Hey, Pastor, I know God called me to something, but I'm just one person. I'm the only Christian in the family. I'm the only one in the family who attends the church. I'm the only nag-iisa lang po ako, pastor. I'm the only one. How could I make any difference at all if I'm only one? I'm the only Christian in our community. I'm the only Christian in the office. How could I make a difference? How could I even make a dent? I'm the only one. My voice is not even heard past my cubicle. How could I make a difference for Christ? Church, we have to remember, if we have the kind of thinking, I'm only one and I cannot make a difference, then I rebuke that thinking. It's not from the Lord. Remember, 1 plus God is everything. There was this by Edward Hale. He says it very beautifully. He says, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." God did not call you to be a pastor. Maybe some of you, yes. But some of you didn't. But God called you for a one purpose. And one purpose only. And make sure you make that purpose well. I remember there was this orchestra. There was this orchestra. It was a kids. I think you probably heard the story. There was this kids musical orchestra, and they were all playing the flute, the drums, the violin. Everyone was so excellent. But there was this one child, a special child, and this child just wanted to be in the school orchestra. Doesn't play the drum, doesn't play any instrument. But she just wanted to be in the school orchestra. And so the conductor, the musical director says, "Okay, let's take her. We'll give her something. Don't worry about it. If she cannot play the violin, that's fine. If she cannot play the piano, that's fine. If she cannot play the trumpet, that's fine. We'll just give her something." And then at the night of the presentation, the little girl was given the triangle. You know the triangle? Ding! That's all. That's her instrument. And it was a Christmas presentation. It was a beautiful Christmas presentation at the very last, when everything was so silent and the light was dim, the spotlight was focused on her, and the conductor says, and she played, ding. That's pretty much it. Church, all of us have our purpose. All of us. We just have to remember, not until we believe that one person can make a difference, will we be willing to take the risk. It only takes one person to make a difference. Just one person. Remember our outreach with Atria? We had fun in Atria. Yeah? Oh my goodness. I couldn't imagine $10,000 a month to stay in that place. My goodness. It was beautiful. But you know what? That idea of reaching out came from one person in the church. One person. One person that rolls out the events. Then I talked to Brother Moore, and then Brother Moore happens to be working in that facility, Atria, and it happens not only working in that, but he is the assistant director of the activity department. I don't know. You have to remember this. When Brother Moore was, when we met December in Jollibee, he was so down. He was so down. I thought, just pray for me. Because normally he's the bubbly. I just lost my job and got fired. Really? I mean, he's been working for LAUSD for the longest time, 6, 7, 8 years. And he was, that was December. Pasko. And I said, don't worry, you know what? Christmas, a season of miracles. By the time the Christmas is over, you'll have a job. And Christmas, New Year's passed, and January I got a text, Pastor, please pray for me. I have this interview in this company called Atria Leading Center. Please pray for me. We prayed, and all of a sudden, Pastor, I got a second interview. Pastor, I got a third interview. Make the story short, he was hired as the assistant director for the activity. And for one reason or another, he loves the job. He loves the job. But I already totally forget that event because praise God, victory, amen, you're working, praise God. And then, when we were having a meeting here in church, why don't we, bring the church to an outreach? One person, just one person. And then it reminds me again, hey, there was this guy. His name is Mark, working in that. And we could probably hook up with him. And the rest is history. So church, what I'm trying to say is this. Our events are all connected, all for the purpose of the kingdom of God. So don't ever think of this one person. It only takes one person. Remember the story of David? If David didn't stand up before Goliath, that was a different story. It only takes one David to slay a giant. And the stories are filled in the Bible. It only takes one Moses to take millions of Jews from slavery. It takes one Elijah. It takes, oh my goodness, all of this. It only takes one person. Only when we move from this is the last, only when we move from our safe harbor to the rescue do we actually make a difference. Esther could have stayed in the palace and not get involved. Not get involved. But she took the risk. Well, chapter 6 is a beautiful story. The king loved her and gave her what she asked. But that was for next time. So, church, I simply cannot get rid of that idea. There's something changed in your lives the past year, past 2 years. And God is telling you something. God will use that for His kingdom. God will use that for His glory. And God will use that also for our church. So don't be discouraged. Pastor. Ito lang eh. There's no such thing as ito lang. There's no such thing as ito lang. Everything really works for good. There's another story by the name of Joseph also. It's a beautiful story. All you have to do is be faithful for where God brought you in. Just be faithful. And one day God will totally reveal to you, I was part of a bigger, beautiful plan. So church, remember this. God is sovereign. Whatever you're going right now, your mistakes, you've fallen, the victory and everything, it all boils down into one big, beautiful, beautiful picture called God's perfect will. And all God's people says, Amen.